Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and it is as follows. With the collapse of the peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians, the blame game begins. U.S. envoy to the Middle East Martin Indyk gave the U.S. view why the peace process failed. According to Indyk, after 6 months of productive direct negotiations, Palestinian leaders shut down, and Indyk singled out Israeli settlement activity as a major but not the only factor. Assessing the conditions that led to the stalled talks, Indyk cited a lack of a sense of urgency among Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Both Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas are committed to achieving a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through peaceful means, Indyk explained, but added that one problem that revealed itself in these past 9 months is that the parties, although both showing flexibility in the negotiations, do not feel the pressing need to make the gut-wrenching compromises necessary to achieve peace. It is easier for the Palestinians to sign conventions and appeal to international bodies in their supposed pursuit of justice and their rights, a process which, by definition, requires no compromise, Indyk criticized. It is easier for Israeli politicians to avoid tension in the governing coalition and for the Israeli people to maintain the current comfortable status quo. It is safe to say that if we, the United States, are the only party that has a sense of urgency, these negotiations will not succeed, he said. The U.S. ambassador criticized steps taken by both sides as contributing to the breakdown of talks. The fact is, both the Israelis and the Palestinians missed opportunities and took steps that undermined the process, Indyk complained. We have spoken publicly about unhelpful Israeli steps that combine to undermine the negotiations. But it is important to be clear. We view steps the Palestinians took during the negotiations as unhelpful also. Signing accession letters to 15 international treaties at the very moment when we were attempting to secure the release of the 4th batch of Palestinian prisoners was particularly counterproductive. And the final step that led to the suspension of the negotiations at the end of April was the announcement of a Fatah-Hamas reconciliation agreement while we were working intensely on an effort to extend the peace negotiations past April the 29th. Indyk also called Israel out for its continued settlement activity. The settlement movement, on the other hand, may well drive Israel into an irreversible binational reality, Indyk warned. Indyk expanded on his argument, saying that settlement activity had sabotaged negotiations and now represented a roadblock to resumption of negotiations. The expansion of settlements on land that the Palestinians believe is supposed to be part of their state and the prevention of their ability to build on the same land is a very problematic situation in the resolution of the conflict, he added. In addition, Indyk argued that public settlement on both sides of the conflict presented a serious obstacle to negotiations. He said that the Americans had tried to get Palestinian and Israeli leaders to engage in synchronized positive messaging to their publics, but to no avail. The veteran ambassador revealed that for the first 6 months after both sides agreed to resume negotiations, Israelis and Palestinians had engaged in direct bilateral talks, with the United States largely serving as silent observers. During those 6 months, all the core issues were discussed, and it was possible to delineate where the gaps were at all of those core issues, Indyk said. At that point, he said, it became natural for the United States to meet with each side individually to work out arrangements. For 2 months, the Americans met with the Israelis for very intensive negotiations in which top officials, including Netanyahu and Secretary of State John Kerry, held dozens of conversations over secure calls, video conferences, and direct meetings. According to Indyk, it was visibly difficult for Netanyahu, but he moved. He showed flexibility. I think we had him in the zone, Indyk said. At the same time, the Palestinians were content to sit back and watch the show as a spectator sport. It was clear that there was a good deal of tension between the U.S. and Israel, and they were content during that time. But during that same period, Indyk said Mahmoud Abbas shut down. Although Indyk acknowledged that settlements were a key factor, the ambassador also noted that rivalries over the successor to the 79-year-old Palestinian president were also a big factor. I think Abbas came to the conclusion that he didn't have a reliable partner for the kind of two-state solution he was looking for, Indyk said. He shifted toward looking at his legacy and his succession. Another gap that Indyk described as very wide was the Israeli demand that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Netanyahu says it's foundational, and Abbas says he will not discuss it, Indyk remembered, while adding that the United States has been consistent in its support for Israel as a Jewish state. Nevertheless, Indyk thinks that there is hope to revive the process in the future. We have passed the 9-month marker for these negotiations, and for the time being the talks have been suspended, he said. However, the peace process itself is not over. In response to Indyk's comments, a senior Israeli official familiar with the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks lashed out at the U.S. Special Envoy Martin Indyk for his hypocrisy for singling out settlement construction as a major factor for the talks' collapse. He said that the U.S. envoy was informed of all Israeli construction plans down to the exact number of homes that Israel intends to build. Furthermore, Indyk knew that it was on this basis that Israel agreed to enter the talks, the Israeli official said, so it's not clear why now that they should be criticized. The senior Israeli official fired back, saying, Indyk comes and blames others without speaking about his own responsibility for the current impasse. It is difficult to point to any significant contribution that Indyk has made to the process, he added, noting that the top U.S. negotiator demanded to be present at all of the meetings despite the fact that the process was meant to be primarily bilateral between Israel and the Palestinians. Indyk's presence at some of the meetings had harmed progress, the official hinted, without elaborating. In certain meetings, his absence would indeed had been advantageous. Israel Deputy Minister Ophir Akunis of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party was also critical of Indyk's views by saying that settlements in the West Bank were not the main reason for the collapse of the peace talks. It is unfortunate that a Palestinian lie also affects our friends, Akunis stated. There are not two truths here, only one. The Palestinians torpedoed the negotiations by choosing to reconcile with Hamas and take unilateral steps to apply to UN agencies. Akunis also noted the flaws in Indyk's logic that construction over the 1967 borders destroyed chances for peace. There were no settlements until 1967, he said. Why didn't the Palestinians extend a hand of peace before that? However, Israel chief negotiator Tzipi Livni shared a different view by saying, settlement construction hurt Israel. It hurts the Palestinians and it hurts the negotiations, she said. Livni added that she could defend Israel against delegitimization efforts around the world, but could not explain or defend settlement construction and expansion. There are people in the government who don't want peace, Livni said, just days before negotiations broke down. Israel Economic and Trade Minister and Jewish Home Party leader Naftali Bennett and Uri Ariel, the construction minister, represents those who want to prevent a peace process, she accused. Other U.S. officials said that while the Netanyahu government settlement program is the original sin committed in the peace process, the U.S. is also highly upset with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas for, in essence, checking out of the peace process as early as February. One key moment in this drama came in March when Abbas, at his own request, met U.S. President Barack Obama at the White House and heard Obama present a set of fairly dramatic American-inspired proposals, some of which had to do apparently with the future borders of the Palestinian state. Obama told Abbas in a direct way that he would be awaiting his response to the proposals. I want you to get back to me soon, Obama said, according to the officials. The United States likened this behavior to the decision made 14 years ago by Abbas's predecessor, Yasser Arafat, who left the 2000 Camp David peace talks without even countering an Israeli proposal for Palestinian statehood. Israel says that it has evidence that the Palestinians were responsible for the collapse of the peace talks. In a letter reportedly sent by Israel National Security Chief to the United States, the European Union, and numerous ambassadors, blames the Palestinians for the collapse of the peace talks and claims to include hard proof that Palestinian officials were devising measures measures to thwart the process even before Israel refused to release a fourth round of Palestinian prisoners at the end of March. In the April 22nd letter, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's National Security Advisor, Yossi Cohen, revealed that Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat wrote a policy paper in March in preparation for a Palestinian rejection of American mediation efforts in Israeli overtures, nearly a month before Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas made a unilateral move to sign 15 international conventions, ostensibly in response to Israel's refusal to honor its commitment to release the final round of Palestinian prisoners. In fact, Cohen said, Palestinian chief negotiator Saeb Erekat planned the maneuver weeks before Israel announced its refusal to release the prisoners. Timing that, according to Cohen, demonstrates that the Palestinian leadership never intended to follow the peace talks through. Cohen attached Erekat's policy paper to his letter, copies of which were reportedly sent to his U.S. counterparts, Susan Rice, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro, all Israeli-based EU ambassadors, and ambassadors from China, Russia, and other countries. He appealed to the recipients to peruse the Erekat document and draw conclusions as to the Palestinians' bad faith and responsibility for the failure of the latest round of peace talks. According to Cohen, the 65-page Erekat document, which contained a highly selective account of the peace talks held since July and a series of recommendations for unilateral Palestinian actions, was presented by Erekat to Abbas on March the 9th, prior to Abbas's visit to the United States and his meeting at the White House with U.S. President Barack Obama on March the 17th. The paper, Cohen said, serves as proof that Palestinian policymakers had recommended a strategy of unilateral moves outside of the agreed negotiation framework to Abbas as early as March, nearly 2 months before the April 29th deadline for the completion of the talks. Thus, when Obama tried at their White House meeting to persuade Abbas to make progress at the negotiations, Cohen indicated the Palestinian president was already bent on torpedoing the talks and following a unilateral course. In the document, Erekat recommended that the Palestinian Authority apply to international treaties such as the Geneva Convention. He also recommended reconciliation with Hamas of the Gaza Strip, revealing that the push for a unity government with the terrorist organization, which does not recognize Israel, began long before negotiations with Israel reached a stalemate. This, Cohen said, proved that the Palestinians' unilateral moves, ostensibly direct responses to perceived Israeli intransigence, were actually premeditated and calculated steps aimed at sinking the peace process and hindering American mediation efforts. Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman blamed Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas for adopting a negotiating strategy of trying to wear one's opponent down without committing to anything. Lieberman said that he wanted to tear off Abbas's mask and say clearly that he consistently rejects peace and that the Palestinian behavior shows that there is absolutely no desire on part of the Palestinians to reach an agreement with Israel. Lieberman said that the Palestinian decision last month to apply for acceptance into 15 treaties and conventions, coupled with the Fatah-Hamas unity agreement, repeats a long-standing and familiar pattern of behavior by Abbas and the Palestinians. Whenever there is progress and a step forward in negotiations, the Palestinians take 2 steps back. Lieberman said that Abbas's application to the international treaties and conventions came just 2 hours before everything was ready for the signing of a document that would lead to the continuation of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. Settlements in the West Bank are not the real problem, Lieberman stated. The real problem is the reluctance of the Palestinians time and time again to pursue peace. While rejecting peace, Lieberman said that Abbas enjoys his status as the leader of a national liberation movement and travels around the world. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.